Also, we got to keep in mind is that we have an antenna in our skull, and that is working 24/7. And higher your awareness of yourself is the extent of your torus, and you're able to reach out into the ether and make those downloads either consciously or subconsciously. So when you're fully informed, then the universe is speaking with you in ways that really blow your mind. And when you learn to pick up on that, that really is where the downloads are coming from, and all this information is unfolded.
That's exactly right.
And I feel that a lot of people, as the more and more we work on ourselves and get away from that reactory state, we can all be into that flow state and start channeling some real truth.
Well, here we have Alex's beautiful chalkboard drawing to help us talk about the 4 quadrants. The 4 quadrants are a fundamental concept of the integral perspective developed by Ken Wilber, an American philosopher and writer on transpersonal psychology and his own integral theory. Wilber's systematic philosophy suggests the synthesis of all human knowledge and experience. The fundamental idea is that all existence, all knowledge, can be mapped into 4 basic quadrants underlying the universe. In this map, the upper half represents the individual, and the lower half, the collective. The left side represents the inner world, and the right side, the outer world. So quadrant 1, the upper left quadrant, represents the inner world of the individual, the thoughts in our head, and all that exists internally and without evidence. Wilber defines quadrant 1 as subjective, an individual, self-consciousness, internal experience, the I. In art, we like to think of the first quadrant as the place where ideas and visions are happening, that image in our head that we'd like to draw or paint. Images in quadrant 1 are the first step in creating art, and yet not art. Quadrant 2, the upper right quadrant, is the external life of the individual, everything that can be measured. The second quadrant is active when evidence is produced. Wilber defines quadrant 2 as objective, an object, organism, thing, or behavior, the it. Using again the model of art, a drawing, painting, or sculpture has come from the inner world of the individual into quadrant 2, where it is physically present, say in the artist's studio or sketchbook or the like. Quadrant 3, the lower right quadrant, is the outer world of the collective, described in Wilber's model as an interobjective system, social and organizational structures, networks, and the environment. The its. In art, the art object in the studio has been shared with the collective, posted on a website or platform, exhibited in a gallery or museum. Now, quadrant 4, the lower left quadrant, represents the inner world or response from the collective. Wilber describes the 4th quadrant as intersubjective, the collective, community, culture, and worldviews, the we. In art, the 4th quadrant would be the response from the collective to your work of art, now shared with others. The like button is 4th quadrant, a review of your art exhibit, or a written piece about you or your work is 4th quadrant. Now, as artists, we notice the speed bumps in our creative practice when we have ideas in our heads that have not made it into evidence. When we do create, but our work languishes in the studio or it hides in a sketchbook, this may indicate that we are simply not ready to share the work. And it may be in a transitional phase, but when there comes the urge to make our artistry known and appreciated by others, we can post our work, or we may win an opportunity to exhibit our work. and we fulfill the third quadrant. And when the work has made it out of our heads, out of our studio, and out of our sketchbook, and is being shared with the collective, we may ask, how many likes did that post get? Were there any sales of the art in the exhibition? Were there any reviews or comments? The response from the collective, the fourth quadrant, is essential in the upward spiraling of a creation. When others see our work and respond to it by learning something that they can carry into their own work, a technique, a design, a theme, something they can carry into their life or their process, that interactive influence contributes to the evolution of consciousness through art. The self is embodied in a web of interrelated systems: the solar system, the ecosystem, the political and economic and cultural systems, the community, school and family, all operating all at once in all quadrants.
You try and put yourself in a receptive place where you're in what you might call a flow state. And you can see that there's something alive in the conversations you're having. You can see the impact of it. You can see the truthfulness, insight of it is being experienced, but you can't pin down exactly what's happening or where this insight is coming from. And what you are doing is channeling without knowing that's what you're doing.
It was Sigmund Freud, an Austrian neurologist, who founded psychoanalysis, a clinical treatment for mental illness that involved a dialogue between a patient and a psychoanalyst. This was a breakthrough in the field of mental health at the time. Freud understood that hidden elements in the preconscious and unconscious psyche, such as repressed desires, can influence our dreams, thoughts, and behavior. Freud theorized a structural model of the psyche, including 3 distinct interacting agents: the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is the unconscious, full of chaotic instinctual desires. The superego posits the ideal social self and has a moralizing role. And the ego is the organized, realistic agent that mediates between the instinctual desires of the id and the critical superego. The self, according to Carl Jung, signifies the unified whole of the psyche, including conscious and unconscious forces. A healthy psyche is the product of individuation, the process of integrating various aspects of our personality in order to fulfill our original and unique promise. For Jung, the psyche has 3 components: the ego, or conscious mind of thoughts, memories and emotions, the personal unconscious that contains forgotten information and repressed memories, and the collective unconscious, the segment of our deepest unconscious mind that is psychological inheritance, containing all knowledge humans share as a species. Individuation is a self-determined process of achieving psychological wholeness and mental well-being. All working together in the self-actualized person are the multiple interacting systems of the psyche, including the social mask of our persona, and many unconscious archetypal forces, such as the repressed shadow that contradicts our persona, and an unconscious balancing gender polarity that Jung called the anima animus. The anima is the image of a woman in the unconscious of a man, and the animus is the image of a man in the unconscious of a woman. As we age and develop, our self-image is influenced by psychological archetypes, like the father, the mother, the child, the old wise one, the hero, the maiden, the magician, and the trickster. There are endless actors in the collective unconscious.
I wanted to quickly go back to epigenetics and tie this into ancient history here. But what I got from that is that environment affects our genes, right? So for quite some time, people thought they were victim to genes, and now they realize that there's kind of a balance with the environment actually having that effect on our genes. through ancient trauma, right? Things have been basically embedded within us, but now through conscious intention, awakening, we could probably shift in our genes through the opposite of that, rather than trauma, through some sort of enlightenment, right? And I want to tie this into the flood that happened, right? The Great Flood. That probably was a collective trauma that was embodied in our being in our human vehicle. What do you think about that?
I think you're absolutely right, Neil. What I found on my world tour of ancestral narratives is that the memories that overlap from culture to culture are very often the memories of traumas. Not only that, because a lot of cultures remember visitors from the stars coming in our deep past and nurturing humanity in the beginning, teaching us how to live. But as you look through the story of beginnings in the Bible, which is where I started, because I came into this through teaching pastors how to interpret the Bible, as I studied those stories of beginnings in Genesis 1 to 11, I found a number of stories of traumas that recur in cultural narratives all around the world. And there are at least 2 flood narratives in Genesis. You've got Genesis 1 that begins on a devastated planet that's flooded. And then you've got another flood described in Genesis 6. And yes, I think those memories are carried epigenetically. But I agree with you, Neil. What we inherit on our genes is not the end of the story. It's not the end of the genetic. So when we go back to a story like we're told in the Popol Vuh, for instance, or in the story of Abasi and Atai, the epic story out of Nigeria, those stories both say that we were engineered, adapted, modified, hardwired to serve as a working class for the ET colonizers. Not a very attractive story. Not a story that you would invent to aggrandize kings and queens or us or ETs or anybody. It's not an attractive story. It's a memory. And I think it's not difficult to see in the history of human society is that we are hardwired to serve superiors. It's why we watch 1% TV. It's why we're so easily manipulated by despots and xenophobes and autocrats, or even employers. We are hardwired to defer to the superior, but that does not have to be the end of the story. And I believe that many of the great luminaries of the ages, people like Buddha, people like Lao Tzu, people like Jesus Christ, many of them had teachings that were directly aimed at unraveling that programming and getting us into a paradigm where we see each other as brothers and sisters, where we see each other as being already in union with one another and with the cosmos. I love the description of God that the Apostle Paul gives in Acts 17. He's having to describe God from scratch to an audience that's not a Jewish audience, it's not a Christian audience, so he has to go from scratch. And so he says, by God, I mean the source of the cosmos and everything in it, that in which we all live and move and have our being. And I love that form of words because there's no separation in it between us and God, us and the source, us and one another. And then immediately he says, as one of your own poets has said. So immediately he's quoting Greek culture and emphasizing me, we. We are all one. And he mocks the idea of sacrificial religion, the idea that we should serve a superior God, and reframes that as we serve one another. In the same way, Jesus reframes the idea of loving God as we love one another. And those teachings are aimed at unraveling that slave wiring and getting us into a brotherhood, sisterhood wiring. And there are many teachings aimed at exactly that, to alter what we do, how we live, and then what we pass on to the generations that follow.